teachers are very independent people. We obviously love to collaborate, but we also love doing our own thing. We have our own systems, we have our own routines that we like develop over the years, and it can be daunting for someone like myself who's just, I guess, like vaguely academic support.
Fire, earth, wind, water. This is the Elemental Educator, and now your host, Tyler Comeau.
Alchemists, welcome to the Elemental Educator Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler, and thank you so much for joining our community for another incredible connection. If you're listening for the first time, welcome to a place where we redefine leadership and challenge the status quo. Take a minute before continuing the episode to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And for those returning alchemists, take some time to expand our community and share this platform with one other person today. I'm so thankful for your passion and dedication to being better together. Now get ready to let the alchemy of education ignite your passion for learning. Today, I'm thrilled to connect with Lucas Clarke, an academic support teacher with a unique blend of expertise in social studies, writing, and now literacy and numeracy. Lucas is in his 5th year of teaching and has already made an incredible mark by supporting educators in navigating the challenges of teaching and bringing out the human side of the profession. His knack for sharing relatable stories and insightful takes makes him a voice that resonates with teachers at all levels, from helping teachers master the art, or maybe just survive, to digging into what keeps them going. Lucas brings an authentic perspective to the field. Lucas, it's great to have you here. Welcome to the Elemental Educator Podcast.
Great to be here, man. Thanks for having me on.
You betcha. And I mean, we'll unpack this a little bit, but you're impacting education across the entire nation of Canada. So we'll get to, that here. There we go. I do say so. And it'll come out right here because I want to know, how did you get to where you are right now?
So I guess long story short, 5 different universities over 6 years, and then taught in Fort McMurray for so it's kind of weird. Like I did like University of Calgary history, poli-sci, like the classic kind of undergrad. Did the secondary education and social studies minor in English at U of A. And then during those 2 years of my ed degree, so this is kind of actually like my 3rd full year teaching, but I say my 5th year because my 2 years in my ed degree, I subbed over 110 days each year, plus practicums because it was during COVID. So everything was online. I was still in a school basically every day, so I don't think that's lost time. I mean, just because it doesn't count toward my years of service doesn't mean that I don't think I'm in my 5th year of teaching. That's kind of what I think. But yeah, so honestly, wanted to get into teaching. Had some teachers that helped me along the way in high school. My dad had cancer when I was in high school, so I kind of fell off the grid a little bit. Had a few that kind of encouraged me, so chose the education path, kind of took that weird university path, I guess, after, and here I am, teaching in New Brunswick.
Now, you just kind of skimmed it a bit. Alberta to New Brunswick. Mm-hmm. It's a big shift, and it was pretty recent.
Yeah, so taught in Alberta for 2 years in Fort McMurray. Grew up in Fort McMurray. Met my dear wife teaching at a summer camp. She was also obviously another leader at the camp. And her family is from St. John, New Brunswick. So she's from Nakwik originally, kind of near the Fredericton area. So really, when you live in Fort McMurray, if anyone doesn't know, that's very up north in Alberta. Not a lot of people go there unless they're kind of looking for their first teaching gig, or they're kind of working in the oil sands, kind of getting a gig up there in that field. We kind of just sat and had the conversation. Like, her dad's a power engineer. Eventually, he's going to retire and go back. Her only other sibling is in New Brunswick, so in St. John. I said, you know what? You and I are both teachers. We're not connected to the oil sands. I'm like, I love Fort McMurray. I grew up there. Still have a lot of friends there. Still have family there. But I just said, why not? Let's give it a shot. I'm originally from Newfoundland, so it's not that far for me to actually be from home now. So we kind of made the decision that, like, okay. And I remember it was, I finished my practicum. We got married in the summer of 2022. And I was like, okay, we're going to move in 2 years. That was our plan. It's kind of like a weird long-term thing to just like, okay, like the next 24 months of our lives are kind of dedicated to, like, obviously we'll go out to eat and we'll do what we can, like still have fun, but our lives are pretty much dedicated to saving as much money as we possibly can to kind of make this move a reality. It was in January of this year. We didn't buy a house in Fort McMurray. So we're like, okay, let's try to. We actually bought a home in New Brunswick before even being interviewed for a position back here, which was a noble move, but maybe a risky, maybe even stupid move.
You're manifesting.
Luckily it's worked out well. We were like, you know what? I mean, the market's kind of dipping up out here a bit. So I was like, okay, if we buy a house now, we likely won't lose on it. So, but I mean, I'm going through all this like mental, like home buying and all this weird moving stuff while also going through the grind of teaching every day. So it was very interesting to kind of go through that. But I would say fundamentally, obviously love the East Coast. Like, I mean, I'm a 2-minute drive from a river. My school now, if anyone follows me on Instagram, it's on like the west side of St. John, and literally like a 6-minute walk and you're on the Bay of Fundy, and it's like a beautiful place to just kind of go eat lunch. So that's a pretty sweet perk of the job, I would say, being near the ocean again. But it was actually my friend and I, shout out Hillary Morgan, her and I in Fort McMurray actually shared like a classroom wall kind of. So I taught social studies and she taught English. And we shared a wall for only like half a year, but for the 2 years we were teaching together, we were like, we're both going to move to the East Coast. Like, we're going to make it happen in some way, somehow. She's from Cape Breton, and she actually made the first moved in the middle of the year because her husband got a job in Cape Breton. So then I was like, it almost kind of made it seem real that it's like, oh, it's actually possible. Like, people can actually move and uproot their lives and change things and be successful and live a great life. So that kind of made it feel real. And then obviously moving toward the end of this year, very sad for myself. Even shout out to Cole McTavish here with my athletics gear on. Absolutely loved my old school. It was a big, chaotic, awesome, loving high school. Was really hard to say goodbye to, but you know what? Change is always good, I think. Trying to change it up a little bit. I went from a high school to a middle school now, but long-winded answer of saying wife's family's in St. John. My mom is actually in Newfoundland now, so that was kind of like, there was no professional reasons to leave. It was more so just family, and she lived in Alberta with me near my brothers for, I guess, the first 8 years of our relationship. So now kind of giving her a turn, being closer to her family while hopefully we start our own family soon.
I love that. And the decision, it's not all that weird, even though you say this 24-month plan might be a little odd.
Yeah.
It's not weird to make a 24-month plan. It's not weird to make a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan.
Yeah.
And we'll unpack this a bit, but this decision is so rooted in an extreme value that's powerful, and actually, shares commonality with the majority of Canadians in family and relationships. I've never made it out to New Brunswick, but I visited Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island, and the East Coast is a beautiful place to be. I can't imagine getting to wake up every day and just get to be around the scenery you're around. Where I'm at in Alberta, I miss being closer to the mountains and getting to see them every day and on my drive, and they're right there, but I'm not in an area close to them. So I can totally understand the appreciation for the environment that you're around. Now, Lucas, you're also a host of Mr. Clarke After Dark, and before we get into what the elements are, we reference a lot about joining the dark side in Mr. Clarke After Dark. So if I just have to ask, this is giving me supervillain vibes, so if you were a supervillain for a day, what would your one ridiculous demand to the world be?
Honestly, I have no idea. I was trying to think about this question. Like, this was probably the one that stumped me the most, but I had joked with my wife this morning. I would say, we're not allowed to put Smarties in boxes of Halloween candy anymore. They always get left behind. They're the last ones. I think that's a ridiculous demand. Give me more of those Aero bars, those Kit Kats. I don't want any of those Smarties in my Halloween box.
All right. Fair enough. Out of all of the demands you could make as a supervillain, we're going to pick on Smarties.
Yeah, Smartie.
So...
Well, I don't know. It's not the. There's probably other things I could do, but you know what? Not really that much bothers me in life. So get those Smarties out of here.
That's fair. I kept thinking about what I would demand if I was a supervillain, and I'm so tired of wearing narrow-toed shoes that I'd want everything to be a bit more open-toed. So I think my demand would be is that the world stops making close-ended shoes and
I like that.
Things that just aren't comfortable.
I know. I only wear Blundstones. That's all I wear.
There you go. But so before we unpack the element side of everything, why don't you take a minute and just share your platform of Mr. Clarke After Dark?
Sure. So, yeah, we got about like 73 episodes kind of posted there today. I was kind of looking over, and I'll be honest, when it comes to like the direction of the show, I think I've updated my podcast info page probably 50 times. And it's not because like I want to completely change the direction or like not make it educational. It's I start to kind of see where I guess my flavor of intellectual interest starts to kind of move as I go. I'll be completely honest, I found coming into teaching just like fascinating only to see like the teachers that you think are just like sleeping at the school when you go home when you're a kid, and then you actually start working with them. You're like, oh, you're just real people with real problems, and you're dealing with all these real problems while battling through the performance of teaching every single day. So that to me was particularly interesting. Of I want to kind of hear the stories behind the people while also still hearing like how do we improve as educators. And I feel like so much of improvement as educators, yes, comes with your like you go to your social studies PD, you kind of hear this new theory about how to like redirect this content and how to convey it to students, but it's also like the way that you change your approach to life and kind of adapt the way that you present yourself to students, I think is so, I guess, underrated in terms of how you see yourself as like someone with efficacy, actually being in the classroom, making something happen, and not just establishing a relationship with students, but actually being able to like engage with all of them genuinely because you've kind of done that self-perspective searching kind of throughout your initial education development.
Thank you so much for sharing. And, you know, changing frequently just means you're refining. That's what we would say. We're refining our tool to get out there. And congratulations on over 70 episodes.
Thank you. Yeah.
Alchemist, this is our milestone episode for us. We are episode 50 live here as you listen to this. So hopefully we get to continue that, and maybe we'll catch Mr. Clarke after dark one day and find a spot on his show at some point to unpack some of these things as well. Love it. So let's dive in and talk about the earth element, which to me is core values. It's the root of everything we do. It guides us, and you've touched on it a bit from your rationale behind your move. But as someone who supports both students and teachers, what values have guided you in this new role that you're in?
I would say there's two kind of main things I guess I try to distill with people and instill. So I try to bring people together to not be hunched over, not be uncomfortable. Really, at the end of the day, we're all educators, we're teachers, we have these weird kind of status positions, but we're all just people going through the motions of the day. Let's not make it more serious than it needs to be. I would say, for example, like at McTavish, our running joke was that our slogan was family, but I genuinely felt like so at home in that school where every day I showed up and I was never like awkward. I always wanted to say hi to people, and like whenever someone was new, like it was always weird to me. We had almost like 90 teaching staff at our school. It was always weird to me when I would talk to teachers and they'd be like, oh, I've actually never spoken to that teacher before. I'm like, what? Like, what do you mean? Like, so that's all I'm doing all the time. And so I guess to me, it's kind of like crafting belonging without actually like, hey, I'm here to help you belong. Like, you don't want to be like weird and kind of in their face about it, but you want to be like, hey, like, how's it going? Like, how's your move been? Kind of getting them comfortable in their own skin in the building. And I would say, I think with the belonging comes confidence. Because like once you feel like you've kind of broken down that barrier, even as a new teacher or a student in the school where you're actually comfortable asking questions about things you don't know, you're going to start building the confidence of actually becoming better. And I would say it's my main thing is that there's no such thing as a stupid question, but there's also everyone needs to actually embody that. Meaning, even if I come to you with a question that I should probably know the answer to, whether that's me to an admin or me to a fellow teacher, don't make people feel stupid for asking the questions. And you can do that without saying things. Like you can kind of give looks. And I think like that to me is so poisonous for any sort of future collaboration because that's always kind of in your head. So you're always going to be hesitant. So I guess I'm always trying to think about belonging with teachers and like, I guess, even new administrators coming into a building. That's always going to be a weird thing where you're kind of coming into this a kind of existing ecosystem and you're trying to establish yourself as a leader. Just say hello. It's not that serious. And then also when I'm kind of doing my like literacy circles, which is kind of mostly what I've been doing now in my new role, you have students who are struggling to read. That's probably like the most anxiety inducing thing that you can possibly go through as a student. Like, okay, if I don't know the inner workings of a volcano, okay, that's fine. A lot of people don't. I ask a question in science, I'm intrigued. But the idea of like reading out loud when you're not really that good at reading yet, that can be so stressful. So I always just try to say, I do not care if you read this in 5 minutes, if you read it in 10 seconds, if we're doing like a speed read activity, for example, for fluency. And I say, like, if another student like laughs at you in here, it's different when they're all like friends and we've kind of established that rapport and we're kind of joking with each other while we're doing it. That's very different. But the laughing at versus with, I always try to make sure we establish the conditions to be able to laugh with each other while we're doing that work, because it just makes it not feel like work.
Love that. And it's a value rooted in relationships. And you talked about it building confidence. I would say building comfort as well, right? It's building a space where people feel safe enough to make a mistake. I will challenge that stupid question comment, though. I think that if I've been asked for the 8th time in the same 10-minute span, what are we doing on? What are we working on? Where are we going? I think some questions can become
fair enough.
It's like navigate down that road. Now I'm not going to admit that in person to saying that they're stupid questions, but I do think that there's times where questions don't need to be asked. Not the topic we wanted to get to though on there. Very powerful story that you're telling though, in creating behind that value and the idea of collective efficacy. And what you're doing is you're setting high expectations. And one of my favorite quotes is, high expectations is an act of love, while low expectations is an act of apathy. And so you're setting these strong demands for not just yourself, but the people around you. And in doing that, you're actually lifting everybody up around you as well. So quite a powerful thing going on in Mr. Clarke's classroom.
Well, hopefully that's always the goal. Whether it's written down or kind of just intuitive, that's always what I'm trying to do. I think that's the point of why we're doing this. So,
absolutely. And I think back to the school you were in Alberta, and we might laugh at that word being family. Mine is working together for success, and we actively make a point of actioning those things. And so for you, family really stood out and maybe felt like it for you because it was something that your team around you was also mindful of as well, and tried to prioritize and emphasize. And even though it might have become a bit of a joke within the community, it was something being actively talked about, and the consistency behind the prompt makes a huge difference.
Well, I think sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like, I think when you start joking about, like, the family motto, it's like the act of joking about it is actually kind of creating that invisible family connection, if that kind of makes sense. It's almost like having that as a conversation. It's like, oh, we're family, but it's like you're already in that motion of, like, joking and kind of shooting the poop a little bit about it. So I think that's kind of the underrated part of where those slogans and, like, kind of community ideas and ideals come from.
Yeah, absolutely. It gives common ground. So you've talked about helping teachers bring out this human side of profession. What's a story or moment that reinforced why that's such an important value for you?
Well, I would say that teachers we're always putting a lot of pressure on ourselves to be very professional, which is obviously a necessity. I would say for me, when it comes to the human side, is that sometimes, like, maybe you notice that, like, a teacher's starting to slip a little bit. Maybe you notice, like, okay, like, it's nothing serious, but okay, but they used to come in at 7:45, and now, like, they're starting to come in around 8:20. Like, they're starting to, like, it's getting colder outside. Like, I'm seeing that grin there too. Like, I'm starting, like, it's getting colder. People are eating more sugar. They're getting those Starbucks drinks. They're kind of starting to wane a little bit in the year. But I guess for me, the most, like, you don't realize how much can happen in someone's life while they're still going through the kind of daily activity where they're maybe distracting themselves from it. But I guess my story would be when I was still in university, like, it was very weird that in 2019, I wrote my final exam for a semester in my arts degree. It was a city politics exam, and it was December 19th. It was our last exam of the semester. December 20th, 2019, my dad passes away at 12:42 p.m. So it's like I'm in there writing an exam the day before. Got an A-, by the way. I'm there writing an exam, kind of going through my day. I'm shaking my professor's hand, knowing that my dad's like in a hospital, like on his last leg of radiation, trying to get something. And he actually was like rushed to the hospital at like 3 a.m. the next morning. I remember actually finishing the exam and being like finally I can like spend some time with my family over Christmas. Like I've been working so hard trying to get this done. I actually remember studying, and he got rushed to the hospital in like a South Calgary hospital because I was like the only one that could take him. We lived in Airdrie at the time, so not far. And I remember there weren't enough rooms ready for him to actually be given one. So he was on a stretcher in the hallway, and I was sitting in a chair next to him with my mom, and I'm going through my medieval history notes, trying to study for my final exam. So it's like, and again, maybe that's even a coping mechanism on my part. Like, okay, I'm going to just focus on what I can control here and try to like do this while he's going through that. But the only reason I even like bring up that story, yes, we all have like parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and siblings that kind of go through, I guess, like traumatic deaths like that. But the weirdest part to me, so I guess I'll share kind of like two moments of that was, I remember, so he passes away at 12:42 p.m. on December 20th, 2019. And I remember it was like a very weird moment when I watch him kind of take his last breath. I stand up, I go out to find the nurse. I'm like, I think he's gone. And then, but the only reason I even bring that story up is that she comes in, and like we're all going through this moment, and like you look outside and the nurses are talking about like the donuts and coffee that were brought in, and like everyone's just going about their lives as usual, and you're like, oh my gosh, like everything kind of changes for you in that moment, and everything else is still going on for everyone outside. And I guess like the part that was surreal to me was going back to school on January 13th. So obviously you would have had Christmas break for university there. We go over to Newfoundland, do the funeral, do everything like that. But I remember sitting down in class, and I'm like, this is weird. Like, this is very weird that I'm just back in school. Everyone's like, oh, I had a great Christmas. Like, we ate turkey. I'm like, this is wild to me. And I guess all that comes to say is that we're still so focused on trying to, like, improve and be there for our professional selves and be there for our students, while, like, everything is kind of going on in the background that we don't really take into account of when we're maybe placing judgment on other teachers or even students for that. Like, we always say about students, oh, they have X and Y and Z going on. That's likely why they're behaving this way, and this way. We don't give the same grace to teachers at all. Now, I'm not saying all teachers are going through that, but yeah, then like the following 6 months, I like went into like my mom moved to Newfoundland, started seeing someone else, and then COVID hit. And then it was just like so much happening in a 6 month span that I started teaching that following September. I'm like, this is so wild that I'm like the person at the front of the room now. And I've had all this going on and no one knows any of it. So, but like that to me is what I find kind of interesting. And part of my podcast is like diving into those types of stories. Like you meet a teacher and you're like, oh, hey, they're like, oh, hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you, Lucas. Like, glad to have you here. And you talk to another teacher. They're like, oh yeah, they went through like a crazy divorce this summer. I'm like, what? I'm like, that's so crazy to me to like hear those stories. But yeah, that's a long-winded answer to kind of like that question, hopefully. But
no, it's great. And it's the front people put on, and it's the things that we do with the mindset of, you know, we have to show up and put kids first. And almost everybody in the education world has been told the moment you walk in that door, whatever you're bringing from outside, you have to leave. Yeah. And I think that's a problem, to be honest. I think it's a problem to mask and to hide it. Now, you're not going to go in absolutely devastated and spend your next 8 periods getting counseled for whatever you may be going through. But it's a testament that we're human, and if we expect to do what's best for kids, we also have to do what's best for teachers, which is to give teachers comfortable spaces to talk about things they're going through as well. Something important about that as well is that can translate outside of education in whatever workplace you might be in, right? We're often told don't bring whatever you're going through to your workplace. That's what causes such a divide between your personal and your professional life. And that's where most of those roadblocks flare up and stem from, is we're hiding who we are at our work, and we're not actioning our personal values in our workplace. But when you value something like relationships and you bring it from personal life to professional life, you start to bridge that gap, and your job starts to become fun, and you start to get invested in it a lot more. And that's the power we see coming out of your story. And it's a powerful story, and it's a good reminder that we don't know what people are going through, but we know how to connect with people on a genuine human level. And when you can do that, you can start to work towards common goals a little bit better, and the day is a little bit better, and the years are a little bit better. So thank you so much for sharing the story,
Absolutely.
Lucas. It's a powerful story. It's a heavy story, but it's a great story because it talks about the foundation of that value and where that value really comes from, and the support behind those relationships. Now, with that, your story had a lot of adversity. So with that adversity, how has even stepping into where you are now been a bit easier because of this value of relationships?
I would honestly, with my new position, like, you're going from a staff of 80 teachers now to one of like 15 or 16 that I'm at now. I would say it's really made myself just like not take myself that seriously. Meaning, like, if I'm going to give others the grace of like not putting them or not taking them seriously, in the sense of not taking them seriously, maybe that's the wrong phrasing, but not looking at anyone with a judgmental eye. Just knowing that, okay, maybe you walk in and like maybe I'm helping support a teacher and the lesson plan's not the best from my perspective. But it's like, okay, I don't know what happened yesterday. I don't know what happened this morning. I don't know what happened last period. That's maybe they're frazzled for a different reason. Like, it's always kind of looking beyond kind of like your initial perception of everything, I think, is the most important part. And I think even for myself, I'm like, I came into literacy and numeracy. I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I think the more people are okay with accepting that they're kind of in a brand new role and needing to come in at admitting what they don't know and knowing that they can grow, I think is the most important thing. But I would say giving myself the grace to be like, okay, I'm in a new position. I'm not going to learn everything overnight. I'm going to make mistakes. There's going to be days where I'm like, I taught like absolute crap today. And there's going to be days where I'm like, this was one of the best days of teaching I've ever had in my life. I know that's going to happen. I know that kind of exchange is going to happen. But I would say that would be the consequence of my adversity, is kind of just being comfortable with myself, knowing that others are probably maybe even going through worse things than that and still kind of going through the motions every day. So it's like you're kind of giving people grace and giving yourself some grace as well.
Love that. And when you're new at something, you are going to learn more than probably the people around you are going to learn. My first year in leadership, I learned so much more probably than what I was able to offer as a leader. And what that does is it makes it so that the following year, maybe I can offer a little bit more, but I'm still learning significantly more than probably what I'm offering out. But I'm in that learning process. And the best leaders are always still learning how to lead. And the best teachers are always still learning how to teach. And the best people are always still learning how to be better people. Yeah. Right? So it's a personal growth journey that we're all on. And it's that continuous, right? That, you know, that it gets laughed about sometimes, but that idea of being a lifelong learner and what it means to the world and what it means to people and what it means to our growth. And so you're summing it up beautifully. And so I love the conversation there. And with that, we talk about not always seeing what's behind the scenes, or not seeing the lesson before, or the minute before, or that thought. And there's so many things that are impacting self-doubt and burnout within not just teachers, but anybody really in a workforce or a public service workforce as well. So with navigating even your new challenge, what strategies are helping you push through those moments and stay so motivated to do what you're doing?
I would say the motivation definitely comes from, like, even this past week, I had students that were completely shut down 3 weeks ago, and I'm like trying to encourage them, and they're like, no, like, I don't want to do this. To even this week, like, I can think of 2 students in my head right now this week. Obviously I won't say their names, but full on speaking out loud, speaking with authority, giving attempts, failing on purpose, and trying to improve. I would say that's definitely what motivated me. I guess first, like, what do you mean by strategies, for example, in regard to that question?
So our air element is all about how we handle difficult moments and just adversity. And you have faced a lot. And, you talked about maybe one of your strategies being when you were in the hospital, you deflected and went right to working on history notes. Now that you've moved locations, there's a lot of stress in even just a move itself. Yeah. Equally, there's a lot of excitement in a move itself. Taking on a new role, there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of excitement. Not having a contract, there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of excitement on maybe I'm going to get it, right? Just settling into a new community. What are you doing, and are you being mindful in terms of recognizing that this is adversity you're facing, and how are you overcoming it when it gets scary?
I would say I definitely lean on both my admin team, and I would say my wife especially. I know that's a cliche thing to say, but my wife's also a teacher, and I would say we've kind of developed this like relationship communication thing where it's not that we... Like, I know sometimes I've heard a lot of like things on relationships where you actually make time to sit down to discuss. Maybe once a week you discuss how are things going in the household, for example. That would be something. But it's just kind of organically started where we both get up kind of earlier. And then we both leave the house around like 7:20, 7:25. But from like 6 to 6:30 every day, we just sit and have coffee together. So it's always been like a daily thing. And it's not like, okay, at 6, we're going to have our coffee time and have this chat. But it's like every day we're kind of balancing each other out, if that kind of makes sense. So it kind of helps me like approach the day the same way. Also, it's kind of nice that at my new district, and I'm not sure if they have this in other districts in Alberta, but I don't think they had it in Fort McMurray anyway, but we actually have learning coaches in our district. So for example, they have like a literacy and a numeracy coach who it's their full-time job to pretty much be available to the new teachers in these subject domains. So it's actually the people in these roles, especially as an AST, like academic support with this new, it's like a new position and I'm new to the district kind of thing. Oh,
created just for you.
I guess so. But yeah, so they got one at every single school that's like K-8 now, and they have actually 2 at elementary schools kind of meant to make up those numeracy and literacy gaps. But I don't shy away from asking for help. I think it's naive to think that you can figure something entirely out on your own, especially if it's not your main background. Like, I want to do X and Y. I want to reach this goal with a student. Like, I want to get them from a grade 4 reading level to a grade 6 reading level by the end of this year. How do I make that happen? Like, you kind of got to go in with those specific questions. Like, don't go in and say, I don't know what to do. Because then you're both going to be like, okay, we're not coming at this with like a critical lens. We're not actually looking at this of, you haven't identified your weakness yet, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You got to go in and be like, okay, I think I know how to teach writing, and I'm like, teaching writing is one thing, but teaching reading is a whole other thing. Like word study and vocabulary. What is the difference of those? I have no idea. But then you do some lessons, you figure it out, you ask some questions. But like, if I ask you, Tyler, I have no idea what to do, versus I see word study and I see vocabulary. How can I teach them differently, and how are they related? That's a way better question to go to your admin team or resource team with. Okay, I had actually these games you can play. These are things I've done. And usually if you go in with vague questions, you're going to get vague answers. Like they'll be like, oh, I used to do this. You're like, okay, well, that doesn't really help me. But you didn't really actually also ask the question. So I think maybe even podcasting helps too, because you're always trying to make new questions and think of like new ideas to kind of go down. So that has probably helped me actually ask more specific questions. I would say I'm learning where your role can be used best, for example. So I don't like to just go into a classroom and just coast around. That's not me. That's not what I want to do. And I noticed like in the first part of my like support role, they're like, so you have the kind of split, and I don't know if I'm going on too much of a tangent here, but you kind of have your resource team. So there's 3 of us, and I'm kind of like a bubble kid interventionist, if that makes sense. Like they're not necessarily like, there's no learning disabilities, I guess, like necessarily assigned, or what's the word I'm looking for? Diagnosed with these kids, but it's like they're kind of slipping through the cracks. They're kind of in grade 7 or 8. They're reading at a grade 3 and 4 level, but they've had COVID. They've had other things that have kind of hindered them along the way. Let's see what we can do to help them improve. So at the beginning, it was kind of like me being in the classroom and helping out, but you also don't want to give like the other teacher too much work to like plan for how to use you as well. So that's kind of where this literacy group kind of came in. So I guess my strategy is always finding ways that I can help the students, and don't worry so much about like what the other adults are thinking of you. Focus on how you can help the students in front of you. I think once you kind of make that, because obviously we're human, we want to belong to a community. We want to build good connections with our colleagues, but at the end of the day, if that's your main concern, fundamentally you should be focusing on how you can actually help the students improve their learning. That's the main thing. I think that's what's kind of helped me, I guess, narrow my focus and ask better questions.
And Lucas, you said something just as important as that point as well, and it's asking specific questions. You know, from my perspective as a school leader, when I get asked vague questions, they get vague responses. It's a very true statement. But when I get asked specific questions, it usually steers me down one of two paths. I either say, whoa, that's so specific, I don't know, but I'm going to find you the answer or connect you to somebody that can give you the answer. Or I'm able to give the specific answer that they're hopefully looking for. You know, to touch on another point as well, in Alberta, it's different for each division. So we have they're called innovation coaches in our buildings. They're not actually connected to an individual building. They're actually connected right to the division. We have two of them. They float around to the schools within the division. You can book them in. They come in. They can take over your classes and teach. They can plan for you. So same but different a little bit because you're in one building, I believe, as well, though, right?
No, so they're based with the division as well, and they've got like two. There's like two literacy coaches. Like there's one for K to 6 and two for K to 12 or something like that. And they're always going around to different schools all the time. So
there you go. And for anybody that is in a literacy world, I would say start establishing your non-negotiables in literacy, right? So non-negotiables that we have is you have to have daily conversation, you have to have daily writing, and you have to have daily reading. And it doesn't matter what capacity you do that to, you need to make sure that you're doing that to some extent. And if you're hitting all three of those, you're hitting developing the English language, which is the most important thing of English language anyway. So we've talked about the earth element, which is our values, and we've really established this value of relationships. And we've talked about the air element, which is the adversity, which we've leaned back on the relationships to help get us through the adversity. We get to transition to the water element, which talks about changes that we're implementing or changes that we're choosing to take on. And we alluded to it, but change is the only constant. It's always going to happen. So in your new role, is there something that you're still excited to implement or make a change with?
I would say it's being more involved in the classroom again for math. I think that's pretty much where I'm like literacy and numeracy. I guess the way that my first 3 months have kind of gone, I've definitely leaned into the literacy part because it's more familiar to me. I mean, I was great at math like until high school. It was just kind of the classic if you teach humanities. It's like, okay, once those letters came in, I was gone. But I would say finding ways to be creative as a co-teacher. I think to me, that's what still excites me as like, how do you, like not just having the teacher and like kind of EA dynamic in a class, but how do you actually have two teachers that are kind of both like, I guess, is it certificated is the word? I've heard a bunch of different words.
Certified?
Well, honestly, certificated is what like a very high level person said to me once. And I was like, I don't think that's a word, but I'm going to roll with it. Certified sounds much better. Learning how to improve the co-teaching dynamic, because again, teachers are very independent people. We obviously love to collaborate, but we also love doing our own thing. We have our own systems. We have our own routines that we like develop over the years. And it can be daunting for someone like myself, who is just, I guess, like vaguely academic support. Like, okay, I've got these 3 math teachers who have completely different routines. How do I work with their students to help them learn? Do I go in and I teach the lesson myself? Do I go in, but then then they're just kind of watching me teach their class? Do I go in for only 20-minute segments while they're actively working so I can kind of split the class into like groups of 12 rather than having one on 24? That kind of, I guess, ideal of trying to make the co-teaching in the classroom the best possible way it can be definitely still excites me. I feel like I'm really seeing the value of still finding a reason to pull students out of class occasionally, not all the time, to do like that one-on-one work and do like the concentrated, like, no, these are affixes, these are prefixes and suffixes, this is what they mean, this is how they change the meaning of words. We do sentence writing, we do our fluency activities. I see the value in that, but trying to, especially in ELA, to be that co-teacher, because that can almost be like a little bit different as well. But I would say learning how to be a very good co-teacher and even like come with new ideas all the time is probably what excites me the most still in this role.
Yeah. And you're not a team and you're not a co-teacher unless you have time to also collaborate and plan and unpack and reflect and review with each other. You'll find that that's quite a powerful tool. It's actually the time that you're not in front of the kids that's going to be the most effective and powerful to feel like a co-teacher, because you're not going in alone for that. And that translates outside of the education world. When you're calling your workplace a team, well, a team works together. And if you're not giving the time to work together, then you're not really a team. You're just a group of people that you're a bunch of individuals, right? Within your population or community trying to work towards something common that you haven't had a chance to talk about and align yourselves to. Yeah. So
something undefined goals.
Right. Something undefined. Yeah. You know, I'm sitting here thinking too, the biggest thing I'm stuck on is what the heck are we going to call these people? Maybe accredited or certified, certificated.
Well, because I remember it was I was still doing my degree, and I remember like, he's a very high position now. He's like a university professor, and he used the word certificated, and I was like, I don't want to correct him. Like, I don't know. Like, is that
they
a
have
real
a lot
word?
of experience, right?
Yeah.
People in those roles have a lot of experience. In my doctorate right now, the number one thing I'm learning is the doctorate just shows you have perseverance. It shows that you can tough it out and get through it and have it done. It does not mean you're smarter. And so use me for experience on that one. Now, I want to jump quickly from the water element that talked about change to the fire element, which starts to talk about our risk taking and our decision making. And I'm going to jump forward a little bit here. As someone who explores the human side of teaching, Lucas, how do you decide when to push these boundaries in your new role to advocate for your teachers or your students?
I would say this is a question I was like a little bit stuck on, because I would say boundaries for me in a professional sense have never really been a huge issue when it comes to advocating for others, because I feel like I've typically always attempted to establish those positive relationships like with my admin team. So I would say maybe even in a lot of ways I started to become like an intermediary. Like the things that maybe the admin didn't want to say to that teacher directly, they would kind of talk to me about, and then I would try to like work on those skills. And not like X or Y is a bad teacher. It's like, I think this teacher is struggling with X, Y, and Z. And like, they would be like in my, maybe potentially in my domain. And so then I would be like, okay, how can I kind of bring that up and how can we work on that together? So it's almost like trying to ask where I could potentially be of assistance, and because I think I can come at it from the sense of like, I'm not going to make you feel degraded if there's something that we feel you can improve on, if that makes sense. Does that kind of answer the question? That's like,
yeah, you'll find yourself in a leadership role in a school at one point here, Lucas. I hope they gave you a portion of their admin allowance for the month that you took on some of the admin duties and having those difficult conversations. You know what? It actually doesn't surprise me that that's the course of action. We've talked about unpacking your earth element and your value of relationships. We've talked about how when the air element brings that adversity, you're leaning on those relationships to get you through the adversity. We talked about even just briefly though, when you're implementing a change, you went right to the collaborative mindset and collaboration teaching. Well, that's also another definition of relationships that need to be built. And then we talk about how do you handle risks, and you talked about an example where your admin team leaned on a relationship they had to bring you to handle it with the relationship you have. So all of the things that we've talked about, you know, center back to that one big theme on you are so rooted in relationships, Lucas, that it's apparent in driving everything that you do and interact with in terms of elements of our earth, air, water, and fire. So it was really cool really cool to hear that story unpack. You hit it spot on with what I was hoping we would get to. I have to ask, you know, it might be a bit of just a settling in process still, but what does your future look like?
That's a great question. I've gone back and forth a lot of, again, thinking of like, okay, now that I've moved, what's my next 24-month plan? Like, honestly, there's been a bit of like a post-planned success shock, if I'm being honest. Like, everything was kind of geared toward this, and I didn't think much about it. I guess professionally, I would say I think I'm going to hopefully start my master's next year. I've gone back and forth. Like, do I want to do leadership? Do I want to do counseling, for example? That's always been something that's intrigued me. I do think in the short term, though, because I'll be completely honest with you, a part of me does really kind of miss that social studies classroom environment. I love teaching grade 11 and 12. Like, for example, I was in a social class yesterday because I'm like covering a prep once a week for a teacher because the way the scheduling kind of worked out. We actually ended up like co-teaching that block with like a discussion, and I felt like all my social studies gears kind of rolling again, and I was like, oh, this is so fun. Like, I've never felt like the actual act of teaching social studies, like being in the classroom part, has never felt like work to me. That has always been like, it's just, I look at the clock, I'm like, okay, 65 minutes just went by. I don't know where that time went, but here we are. Once I like actually get in the groove of things. So I would say I'm hoping to potentially start a master's of curriculum and instruction with a social studies concentration. I know literacy and numeracy kind of get like the classic like emphasis for things, but where that was like my previous specialization, I think for me, it's just further developing my specialty. I think it's something I would like to continue doing. Obviously, the podcast, for whatever this becomes, I know that eventually when this comes out, we'll have our Maple Minds discussions as well. I'm super excited about that. And honestly, keep the podcast going, try and start a master's, keep going down like my intellectual rabbit hole of social studies education, keep that going, and hopefully grow as a person that, because I think like the literacy and the strategies that I'll eventually learn from co-teaching math will help me add so much variety to a social studies classroom maybe down the road. And maybe I'll be completely honest, like VP and principal seems like so daunting to me that I don't know.
You have to pick what you teach if you have a teaching load. Just so you know, you can give yourself social.
Okay. And honestly, maybe eventually down the road, like maybe like a half VP, half social, like that would be something I'd be really interested in. But I don't know. I see a lot of a conversation I had with one teacher that said like they went from teaching students at like you see the best of them to seeing like the most like devastating side of them all the time, and like that can wear on you, as I'm sure you know, as like a VP and a principal, and even teachers, for example, you always kind of see that like struggling side of them all the time, which can be a lot on yourself. But I would say for me right now, kind of growing into this role, getting, I guess, once I feel comfortable with it, which then I'll know it's time for something new, hopefully starting that master's of curriculum and instruction in social studies, and maybe seeing wherever this podcast goes.
I love that. And even in just that response, I can tell there's so many other tangents we can unpack and talk about that we'll have to have another episode down the road where we connect, we see where it's going. Maybe you're going to the West Coast or something later on. I'm not sure.
Maybe, honestly, I'll be in Victoria or something eventually.
Yeah, there we go. Well, what advice, if you could give one piece of advice to anybody that's listening to this episode, Lucas, what advice would you be giving them?
Take the pressure off yourself. I think to me, going from my first to second year, obviously you go from, like, I taught all social studies all year my first year and then all year my second year. And obviously I had a lot more comfort with the curriculum. I had a lot more comfort with myself. But I think like we almost always kind of put this, and maybe it's just me with like I've gone through my trial and error of imposter syndrome many times on my podcast, but once you like learn to realize like, okay, like no one is actively thinking about you all the time. No one's like thinking, okay, like what is Mr. Clarke not doing in his class today? Like no one's thinking that. Like you admit you're busy. You got other things to do. You're going through your own thing. You're trying to do the best at your job. And I would say once you learn to just be like, you know what? Take a deep breath. If I teach my students nothing this block, but I at least maybe enhance our connection, that's still not nothing. I think obviously curriculum, I'm not going to say curriculum's not important. That's not what I'm saying, as I want to do a curriculum and instruction degree.
That'll be our title.
Yeah. Don't teach
Curriculum is not important with Lucas Clarke.
But I think like if you can at least still like you're surviving the day, you're connecting with the students, they're seeing you as someone they can potentially see as a role model. I think that is fundamentally one of the most important things. And again, the curriculum will follow if you establish that.
Absolutely. You have to build relationships. There's a reason in Alberta, the teacher quality standards and leadership quality standards and superintendent leadership quality standards, the first one is establishing effective relationships, because you can't do anything else if you don't have a relationship with who you're working with. Yep. Now, Lucas, how can our listeners get in touch with you if they want to check out your show or connect?
Sure. So I'm on YouTube for all the video ones. I have LinkedIn and Instagram are probably my main social medias that I use, but I'm on X at mrclarke.afterdark on pretty much everything. But yeah, shoot me a message. Maybe send me a story, send some questions to the show. Would love to hear more questions, ideas, and insights from anyone.
Love it. And alchemists, as we wrap up our episode, I want to take a moment and just share my appreciation for your listenership. You're the reason we're here. You're the inspiration for the show. And I hope our journey today sparks some points of interest for you. To dive deeper, make sure you're subscribing to our monthly newsletter for scholarly insights, actionable strategies, and an in-depth analysis of each episode. Reach out in our Instagram DMs for the link, or if you just want to connect. And Lucas, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to connect, collaborate, and empower us with your lived experiences.
No worries at all. Thanks for having me. Appreciate all you do, Tyler.
You've been listening to the Elemental Educator. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, find us on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Elemental Educator.